The frost clung stubbornly to the earth that morning, crusting the ground in silver and making each breath bloom like pale smoke in the dim light. Leora had been awake for hours as she always was, tending to the chickens and coaxing the old stove into something resembling warmth. She had just finished mending the hem of her only winter skirt, a task she had learned to do quickly and without fuss, when her stepmother's voice cut through the thin walls like a cold blade. "Leora, come here." The tone was not a request but a summons, heavy with that familiar weight of authority and disdain. Leora wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into the main room. The fire in the hearth was no more than a weary cluster of embers, yet her stepmother sat beside it wrapped in thick wool, as if guarding what little heat there was from everyone else. The woman's eyes, pale and sharp as ice chips, traveled over Leora's form with deliberate slowness. "You will go into the village today," she said, her voice smooth in the way oil is smooth, slick, concealing its own unpleasantness. The stepsisters looked up from their steaming mugs of broth, their faces bright with amusement. Both were dressed warmly in fur-trimmed cloaks, their cheeks pink from comfort, not cold. One of them smirked and muttered just loudly enough for Leora to hear, "Perhaps they'll mistake her for a beggar before she even opens her mouth." Leora kept her gaze steady though the remark stung. She had learned that reacting only gave them more to feed on. Instead, she shifted her shawl around her shoulders, the fabric so thin it did little to guard against the morning chill. "You will ask for food and coin," her stepmother continued, "and you will tell anyone who asks that it is for the whole household. Be sure to look pitiful, let them see how poor and desperate we are." Leora understood immediately. This was no errand born of necessity, there was food enough in the pantry though not lavishly so. This was meant to humiliate her, to parade her patched clothes and bare hands through the village streets, to make her the public face of want while her stepmother and stepsisters stayed home in warmth and pride. The woman leaned back in her chair, her lips curving into a smile that had no warmth in it. "Do not return empty-handed," she said, "or you'll find no supper here tonight." The stepsisters giggled. One plucked an imaginary thread from her cloak and said, "Be sure not to trip in the mud, dear Leora. The stains may never come out of that lovely skirt." The cold seemed sharper when Leora stepped outside. The sun was only beginning to rise above the distant trees, staining the frost-tipped fields in pale gold. Her breath came in small clouds, each one dissolving into the still air. She pulled her shawl tighter, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingertips, and began walking down the dirt road toward the village. Her shoes, worn thin at the soles, let the icy ground bite at her feet. Each step carried the weight not only of the errand itself but of the watching eyes she had left behind. Her stepmother's smug satisfaction, her stepsister's barely contained laughter. The road was quiet save for the crunch of frost underfoot. The skeletal branches of the trees leaned in on either side, whispering in the faint wind. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called, its voice rough and ancient. Leora let her mind wander as she walked, trying not to think of the stares she might draw in the village square, the pitying murmurs, the whispers that might cling to her long after the day was done. Yet beneath her dread was a thread of something else, small but steady. It was the memory of other journeys she had taken alone, into the hills to gather wild herbs, to the river for smooth stones the hearth loved to hold, to the meadow where she had once found a cluster of wildflowers blooming in the dead of winter. Strange things had always seemed to happen to her when she was sent out into the world. Sometimes it was a sudden change in weather, sometimes it was the appearance of someone she had not expected to meet. She could not name it, but she felt it now, the faint awareness that this journey, too, would not be what her stepmother intended. The village roofs soon came into view, smoke curling from chimneys against the cold sky. Leora took a deep breath and stepped forward, the frost crunching more loudly under her feet. Whatever lay ahead, she carried the quiet certainty that she would return changed, and not in the way her stepmother imagined. Before the house had turned cold, before shadows seemed to linger in the corners, Leora's world had been warm in the truest sense, not just in the hearth's glow, but in the way her father's laughter filled every room. He had been a tall man with strong hands that could build anything and a voice that could make even the saddest song sound like a promise. He called her Little Bird because she was always singing, while fetching water from the well, while mending a tear in her apron, even while sweeping the floor. Her songs were soft but sure, carrying melodies she made up on the spot. The village knew her for that voice and for the way she greeted everyone she met. Strangers passing through found themselves offered a cup of broth if the day was cold, or a slice of honey bread if the sun was bright. She had an easy way of seeing the weariness in people and offering them something to make it lighter, even if all she could give was a smile. Her father often took her with him to the market, where she would help carry baskets or hold the leather straps of bundles he bought. She learned the names of every merchant, from the fishmonger who kept a lucky brass coin in his pocket, to the baker whose beard always smelled faintly of cinnamon. They would slip her little things, an apple here, a sweet bun there, because she had a way of making them feel as if they were doing something grand and important just by giving her a gift. Leora's hands were clever from a young age. When her father's shirt tore on the cuff, she didn't just stitch it closed, she found a scrap of fabric in a matching shade, embroidered a tiny sprig of wheat on top, and made it look like it had always been that way. She could repair baskets so neatly that the mended parts were stronger than the original weaving. The neighbors began to bring her small tasks, a frayed shawl, a dented pot handle, a worn doll with a limp neck. She took to each one with patience, and when she returned them, the owners would often find them improved in ways they hadn't asked for. Her father would watch her work, his eyes full of pride. "You've got your mother's hands," he would say, and though Leora had never known her mother, she had died when Leora was very small, the words made her feel as though she carried something precious from her. Life changed slowly at first, like the shift of seasons that you don't notice until one day the leaves are gone. Her father began speaking less, smiling less. He worked harder and came home later. Then one autumn, he brought a woman to the house, a widow from a neighboring village with 2 daughters of her own. Leora tried to welcome them, offering to show the girls her favorite walking paths, but they declined, their eyes sliding over her like she was nothing worth looking at. At first, her father's presence seemed to keep the peace. But a year later, a winter illness took him, sudden and sharp. Leora was 16. The day after they buried him, the house felt different, not just emptier but tighter, as if the air had been drawn in and locked away. Her stepmother wasted no time in claiming her authority. The warmth that had lingered in the hearth faded as she began rationing firewood for herself and her daughters, leaving Leora to work in the chill. Her stepmother took her mending and weaving for granted, piling it high each morning and criticizing even the neatest stitch. The songs faded from Leora's lips, not because she forgot them, but because every time she hummed, her stepsisters would roll their eyes or mock her softly under their breath. "Trying to charm the chairs, are you?" one would say. The other would add, "Save your breath, no one's listening." There were no more trips to the market except on her stepmother's orders, and never for her own pleasure. She was sent with lists too long for her arms to carry at once, returning to find the warmest spots by the hearth already claimed. If a neighbor stopped to speak with her on the road, she would be scolded for dawdling. Even so, her kindness did not disappear. She still greeted people when she could, though her voice was quieter now. She still mended what she was given, though her fingers ached from the cold. And when she found herself alone, she would sometimes sing under her breath, so faintly that no one but she could hear. What her stepmother didn't understand was that Leora's patience was not the same as weakness. The girl who could turn a frayed shawl into a thing of beauty, who could see worth in the broken and discarded, had learned to do the same with her own spirit. And though the house felt more like a cage with each passing season, Leora kept her hands busy, her thoughts sharp, and somewhere deep inside, the small ember of warmth her father had given her still burned. It was this ember, unseen, underestimated, that would change everything when the world finally decided to notice her again. The roots of bitterness rarely spring up overnight. They grow slowly, watered by envy and fed by insecurity. In Leora's household, such seeds were sown by her stepmother and stepsisters, who could not bear the way her presence seemed to glow with a light that was not their own. Leora's beauty was not only in her face but in her spirit, the softness of her eyes when she listened, the gentleness of her touch when she helped others, and the quiet steadiness that made people feel at ease around her. For the stepmother and her daughters, each of these qualities became like a thorn pressing against their pride. Where others saw grace, they saw weakness. Where others saw kindness, they saw foolishness. And where others saw patience, they saw passivity that deserved to be mocked. At first, the resentment showed itself in small comments. A stepsister would sigh loudly when Leora sang, saying her voice was too sweet, like honey that sticks in the throat. Another would scoff when Leora mended torn clothes with careful hands, muttering that anyone can stitch rags if they have nothing better to do. Their mother encouraged these jabs, planting them deeper by framing Leora's virtues as flaws. "She is soft," the stepmother would say, loud enough for Leora to hear. "A girl like that is useless in a hard world. What good is her singing when there is wood to chop and floors to scrub?" Leora never responded with anger, she only lowered her eyes and continued her work. But her silence, instead of shaming them, only made their bitterness grow. It was in the village, however, that the envy sharpened into something darker. People admired Leora when she fetched water from the stream or carried baskets to the market. Strangers greeted her warmly, drawn to her quiet charm. The stepsisters noticed how the young men of the village lingered a little longer when Leora passed, how elders often asked for her help rather than theirs, and how children laughed more freely when she joined in their games. Each smile Leora received was like fuel to the smoldering fire of resentment. Her stepmother, seeing the shift in attention, began to fear that Leora's reputation would outshine that of her own daughters. And so she twisted every opportunity into a chance to diminish her. When Leora shared food with a hungry beggar, the stepmother scoffed and whispered to the villagers, "She only gives away what is not hers. She is careless with provisions." When Leora's singing brought comfort to a neighbor's sick child, one of the stepsisters hissed, "Do not be fooled, she sings only to show off her voice." Even when Leora quietly repaired broken tools for villagers, they sneered, "She meddles too much," as if she wants to prove she can fix what men should handle. Their campaign was subtle but relentless. Each word aimed to paint her goodness as vanity, her talents as weakness, and her patience as a lack of spirit. Yet what stung them most was not only the admiration Leora received but her refusal to fight back. In their eyes, her silence made her seem proud, as though she believed herself above their insults. The truth was simpler. Leora knew her father would not have wanted her to quarrel, and she carried his lessons of gentleness as a shield against cruelty. But to her stepmother and stepsisters, that shield was infuriating. They began to plot not only to belittle her but to humiliate her, to strip away the quiet respect the village showed her. Their whispers became schemes. If they could burden her with endless chores, perhaps she would be too weary to sing or smile. If they could soil her clothes and keep her hidden in rags, perhaps the villagers would no longer notice her beauty. And if they could twist her reputation into something fragile and doubtful, perhaps admiration would turn to pity, or worse, disdain. At night, while Leora slept in the corner by the hearth, the three of them whispered among themselves, feeding each other's envy with plans that grew bolder and crueler. The more they plotted, the more determined they became to see her spirit broken. In their eyes, the only way to restore balance in the household was to make sure Leora's light dimmed, or better yet, was snuffed out entirely. What they did not understand, however, was that true grace does not wither under cruelty. It only deepens, like roots sinking quietly into the soil, waiting for the right season to bloom again. But for now, the seeds of envy had been planted firmly, and the stepmother and stepsisters tended to them with every sneer, every slight, and every whispered word of malice, setting the stage for the trials that would soon test Leora's spirit more than ever before. The path from her stepmother's house to the heart of the village was long, stretching like a ribbon of dust and stone across fields that once carried echoes of her father's laughter. Leora knew every bend, every thorn bush, every spot where the wind funneled through and made the trees hum like flutes. Once, that road had felt like a friend to her, a companion when she carried baskets of fruit alongside her father, or when she skipped down it singing to herself. Now, with her family name soiled by whispers and her garments patched thin, the same road seemed longer, colder, and heavier with every step. The early morning air bit against her cheeks. The winds that swept across the plain carried not only dust but also the murmur of voices, villagers stirring, traders calling out their goods. Leora wrapped her arms around herself, clutching the tattered shawl that had once belonged to her mother. It smelled faintly of lavender, though the scent was fading with time. That shawl, though frayed, was her only shield against the world's indifference. As she walked, heads began to turn. People on donkeys slowed as they passed her, some raising their brows with pity, others with a sharp smirk. The children, too young to understand the cruelty in their words, pointed at her torn skirt and whispered to one another. "Is that not the girl from the old house?" one murmured. "The one whose father left her with nothing?" another asked. But Leora did not allow their words to settle into her heart. She lowered her head, smiled softly, and kept walking. She had learned long ago that answering cruelty with silence was not weakness but strength. Her father's voice returned to her in moments like these. The world may throw stones, my child, but it is your choice whether you gather them in anger or build with them in patience. The jeers came sharper as she entered the busier part of the road. A woman selling clay pots hissed under her breath, "Look at her, all hollow cheeks and empty hands. A waste of beauty when she could have made a good marriage." Others echoed, "Soft. Useless. Nothing like her stepmother's strong daughters." Leora met their eyes briefly, not with defiance but with kindness. She nodded politely to the pot seller, complimenting the smooth curve of her clay work. For a moment, the woman faltered, as though unsure how to return hostility to someone who offered her grace. Then the woman turned away in silence, hiding her unsettled face. Her steps were slow but steady. Every few paces she reached into the small cloth pouch at her side. Inside were crumbs from the previous night's stale bread, the little her stepmother had allowed her to keep. She scattered them along the road, and soon tiny brown sparrows darted down, pecking eagerly. Watching them warmed her heart. Though her own hunger gnawed at her belly, she found joy in feeding the creatures that trusted her gentle hands. A young boy noticed what she was doing. "Why waste food on birds when you need it more?" he asked curiously. His mother pulled him away, embarrassed by his question, but Leora smiled at him. "Because kindness, little one, multiplies. A crumb for a bird may become a song for someone else." The boy's eyes widened as if he had been told a secret of the world. The road continued winding, long and weary. Clouds gathered above and the wind cut sharper. Dust stung her eyes, but she blinked against it, refusing to let discomfort stop her. A cart full of grain passed, the driver spitting near her feet as if to mark her place on the road. She whispered a blessing for his journey, even though his gestures stung. Step by step, the weight of mockery pressed on her shoulders, but each time it threatened to overwhelm her, she found solace in small acts. Greeting an old woman bent over her bundle, brushing leaves from the road so others would not slip, scattering another handful of crumbs. The world might see her as diminished, yet her heart insisted on shining through. By the time the village gates came into sight, Leora's legs ached, but her spirit had not bent. She carried herself upright, her face calm, as though every cruel word had been carried away by the wind. For though the road was long and lined with scorn, she walked it as one who still believed in gentleness, as one who knew that even in ashes, a flame could be born again. The morning mist clung low to the ground as Leora trudged along the beaten road, her feet sore and her thin sandals worn smooth by stones. The path stretched endlessly ahead, winding through patches of thorn and scrub, with the distant promise of the village market barely visible in the haze. Each step weighed on her, not only from exhaustion but from the bitter words of her stepmother and stepsisters echoing in her ears, soft, useless, foolish star. Yet she carried on, shoulders straight, her eyes set ahead, whispering small prayers into the wind. Her bundle was pitiful, a cloth pouch with scraps of dry bread and a small gourd with the last of yesterday's water. She had rationed it carefully, sipping only when her throat burned, but now the gourd was nearly empty. Still she did not despair. "The road is long," she murmured to herself, "but even stones remember the feet that pass them." A crow swooped low overhead, cawing as if mocking her. Leora smiled faintly and broke a tiny crumb from her bread, tossing it onto the dirt. "For you, wanderer," she said softly. The bird pecked at it, tilted its head at her and flew on. Acts of kindness, however small, gave her strength. By midday the sun burned through the mist, harsh and unyielding. Sweat trickled down her brow, and her throat ached for water. She lifted her gourd and tilted it carefully, only a swallow remained. She pressed it to her lips but did not drink, saving it for when the ache became unbearable. It was then she saw the figure ahead, an old woman hunched beneath a heavy cloak, sitting on a stone at the side of the road. Her head was bowed, and her hands trembled as she clutched a crooked walking stick. The air around her seemed oddly still, as though the birds and insects had hushed in her presence. Leora slowed her steps, concern etching her face. "Mother," she called gently, "are you well?" The woman lifted her head. Beneath the cloak was a face lined with deep creases, her eyes sharp yet weary, glimmering with an unreadable depth. Her lips parted, and a voice raspy as dried reeds escaped. "Child, water. Please, a sip." Leora's hand went instinctively to her pouch. She felt the gourd's weight, or rather, its near emptiness. Her heart wavered. That swallow was all she had until she reached the village, and she did not know how far it truly was. If she gave it away she would face the heat with nothing. But hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. She thought of her stepmother's words, useless, soft star. No, she thought, there is strength in giving. She knelt before the old woman and placed the gourd into her hands. "Drink all you need," Leora said with quiet conviction. The woman's gnarled fingers brushed hers as she accepted it, and her eyes flickered, almost glowing for an instant. She raised the gourd, drank deeply and sighed, the sound like wind rustling through ancient trees. When she lowered it, the gourd was still half full. Leora blinked in surprise but said nothing. She only smiled and tied it back to her pouch. "You would give your last," the old woman murmured, her gaze searching Leora's face. "Why?" "Because thirst burns sharper than hunger," Leora answered simply. "And no traveler should suffer if I can ease it." The woman studied her for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow movement, she reached into the folds of her cloak. From within she drew a small pendant, a delicate charm carved from bone, smooth as river stone, strung on a cord of woven thread. She pressed it into Leora's palm, closing the girl's fingers around it with surprising strength. "Keep this close," the woman whispered. Her voice seemed to echo though no one else was near. "Keep your song alive, child. Do not let the world silence it, no matter how it tries." Leora's brow furrowed, puzzled by the words, yet warmth spread through her chest as she felt the pendant's weight. It was plain, unremarkable even, but it carried a quiet pulse, as though it held a heartbeat of its own. She bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you, mother. I will treasure it." The woman smiled faintly, her wrinkled lips curling as if in secret amusement. "We shall see, little dove. We shall see." Before Leora could speak again, the woman rose with surprising ease, her cloak swirling around her. For a moment she seemed taller, straighter, her shadow stretching impossibly long across the road. Then with a blink she was simply walking away, her staff tapping softly against the stones. Leora stood, clutching the pendant tightly. A strange calm filled her, as though the air itself had shifted. She tucked the charm safely against her skin and continued down the road, her steps somehow lighter, her heart steadier. The village still lay far ahead, and her hardships were not yet ended, but for the first time in many days, hope stirred within her. For kindness, she believed, always planted seeds, seeds that would one day bloom even in the harshest soil. And so she walked on, the sun glaring above, the dust swirling at her feet, and the pendant against her heart whispering of songs yet to be sung. Leora's feet carried her slowly into the heart of the village. The road narrowed, hemmed in by clay huts with smoke curling from their thatched roofs. Children darted across her path, chasing a ball of rags, their laughter ringing sharp and bright against the dull hum of market stalls. The smell of roasted maize drifted on the air, rich and tempting, and her empty stomach cramped with longing. She paused, pressing a hand against her shawl as if to quiet the ache within her. The villagers noticed her. Some stared openly, others only glanced and turned away. Whispers carried, "That's Leora from the old family. Didn't they lose everything?" There was pity in a few voices, disdain in others. Leora lowered her eyes but lifted her chin at the same time, careful to hold her posture with dignity. She would not stretch out her hand like a beggar on the roadside. Her spirit would not allow it. Instead, she walked to the square where traders sold their cloth, grain, and small trinkets. The clamor was overwhelming, voices bargaining, goats bleating, drums in the distance. She found an empty step beside a stall stacked with earthenware jars and sat, folding her hands neatly on her lap. For a long moment she was invisible, another shadow among many. Then softly she began to sing. Her voice was not loud but clear, carrying with it the gentleness of a stream trickling over stone. She sang of the wind bending grass, of the dawn breaking across fields, of birds scattering joyfully into the sky. People slowed. A woman balancing a basket of yams on her head lingered to listen. A child tugged on her mother's arm, whispering, "She sounds like the river does at night." When her song faded, Leora smiled and said, "I can mend your cloth, polish your pots, carry water. I ask for no more than what you can spare." Her words were not desperate, they were steady, offered with respect. That, more than anything, stirred the villagers. The basket woman placed a heel of bread in Leora's hand. "For the song," she said. An old man with a crooked back gave her 2 small coins. "My net is torn. If you can patch it, more will follow." Even the children, eyes wide with awe, offered her the last of their roasted groundnuts, giggling when she bowed her head in thanks. Each act of generosity warmed her more than the food itself. And yet, beneath her shawl, another warmth stirred. The pendant pressed against her skin as if alive, radiating a subtle heat that spread through her chest. She touched it briefly, remembering the old woman's words, "Keep your song alive." By midday she had a small pile before her, a crust of bread, a few nuts, 3 coins dull with age. It was not wealth, but to Leora it felt like abundance. She divided the bread into pieces and, before eating, set a crumb aside on the step for the sparrows pecking nearby. The villagers noticed. Murmurs rose again, this time softer, more thoughtful. "She gives even when she has little," someone whispered. "Strange girl," another said, but there was no cruelty in it, only curiosity. A woman approached, her shawl embroidered with careful patterns. "Can you stitch?" she asked. Leora nodded. The woman placed a torn hem in her lap. "Mend this and I will bring you more." So Leora's hands set to work, steady and skilled, though hunger trembled through her fingers. She sang quietly as she sewed, the tune lifting like incense into the air. The crowd gathered again, drawn not just by her voice but by the grace with which she carried her hardship. When the hem was returned neat and strong, the woman pressed another piece of bread into her hands, larger this time, along with thanks. Leora's smile reached her eyes, and for a heartbeat, the villagers saw not a fallen girl but a light among them. As dusk painted the sky with streaks of gold and violet, Leora rose from the step. She had eaten just enough to steady herself, saved a coin for the morrow, and shared her crumbs with birds until they fluttered after her in a small cloud. The pendant pulsed warmly against her heart as though approving her choices. She walked away from the square not as one defeated, but as one beginning anew, softly weaving herself into the fabric of a village that had first met her with doubt but now began cautiously to open its hands. The square was alive that morning, a hum of barter and chatter spilling from every corner. Merchants called out their wares, children darted between baskets of figs and jars of olives, and the old men leaned on their canes to watch the day pass slowly. Leora stood at the edge of it all, her voice rising like a thread of silver through the noise. She did not beg. Her song was not one of sorrow, though hunger gnawed at her belly. It was a song of rivers and dawns, of lost mothers and remembered fields. People turned, surprised that such a voice belonged to a wanderer with dust-stained skirts and no roof to claim. Some tossed her a coin, others offered half a loaf. She bowed in gratitude, the pendant at her throat pressing warm against her skin. Then the air shifted. It began as a hush, the kind that falls before a storm. The merchants' cries trailed into silence and the children slowed their chase. A wind stirred, gentle yet strange, and the sky seemed to ripple as though a veil were being drawn aside. Leora kept singing, unaware at first of the wonder gathering above her. The notes left her lips like prayers, and the clouds, instead of darkening, bloomed with radiance. Gasps broke from the crowd. Overhead, the sky had filled with luminous clouds, soft and golden, not heavy with rain. They shimmered, pulsing faintly as if responding to the rise and fall of Leora's melody. And then, without thunder or flash, the first coin dropped. It was no ordinary coin. The moment it struck the stones at her feet, it rang clear as though the square itself were a great bell. Then another fell and another until they came like rainfall, not pounding, not harsh but gentle, steady, each coin gleaming as it floated down. The people shrieked, astonished, throwing up their hands to catch them. Yet their hands closed on nothing. The coins slipped through their fingers like smoke, vanishing before they touched flesh. Some leapt, desperate, waving their baskets in the air, but the coins curved away as if guided by unseen threads, descending only to gather around the singer. Leora's voice faltered, her song breaking as she stared at the growing pile shimmering at her feet. She stumbled back, clutching the pendant, her eyes wide with disbelief. Could this be sorcery? A curse? A trick played by unseen spirits? But the warmth in her chest, the same warmth she'd felt when the old woman pressed the pendant into her palm, reassured her. Her song, someone whispered from the crowd, the heavens are answering her song. A child darted forward, scooping at the coins. His small hands passed through them as though through water, and he stared at his palms, empty and trembling. The villagers gasped again. One by one they began to bow their heads, some in fear, some in awe. Still the golden rain fell. Leora could hear the faintest of melodies within it, as if the coins themselves were singing, a harmony twining with the remnants of her song. The sound filled the square, weaving through market stalls and echoing against the stone walls. Her heart pounded. When the last note left her lips, the golden clouds thinned, dissolving into bright blue. The final coin drifted down and settled atop the gleaming heap at her feet. Then silence. For a long moment no one moved. The village seemed to hold its breath. Then, as though released from a spell, voices rose in a wave. Some cried miracle, others muttered witchcraft. A few crossed themselves and fled, but most pressed forward, not daring to touch, only staring at the impossible wealth lying before the ragged singer. Leora sank to her knees. She reached out, half expecting the gold to dissolve like mist. But her fingers closed around a coin. It was cool, solid, and heavy. Her breath caught. Real. It was real. The crowd surged closer, eyes blazing with greed and wonder. Yet when one bold merchant tried to seize a coin from the pile, his hand went straight through as if through shadow. He staggered back, pale, trembling. The villagers gasped again, murmuring, "Only hers, only for her." The pendant at Leora's throat pulsed warmly, and she understood. This gift, whatever power governed it, belonged to her alone. Not for the hands of others, not for theft, but for her voice, her kindness, her song. Her knees shook, overwhelmed by the weight of it. The villagers who had shared their bread with her now fell to their knees, bowing, praising, calling her blessed. Children tugged their mother's skirts, pointing at the coins in wide-eyed awe. And in that golden rain, in that sudden reverence, Leora felt both fear and promise wrap around her like a cloak. She was no longer just a wanderer with an empty belly. The heavens had marked her, and nothing would ever be the same again. The coins shimmered at Leora's feet, bright as morning dew kissed by the sun. For a long moment she simply stared at them, half afraid to bend and touch them, as though they might vanish like a dream if she reached too quickly. The villagers around her whispered, their voices weaving into a tapestry of awe, suspicion, and wonder. Some crossed their arms, muttering about witchcraft. Others gazed at her as though she were a saint descended among them. But Leora herself felt neither fear nor pride. She felt only a trembling gratitude that brought tears to her eyes. Bending slowly, she gathered a handful of the golden coins and pressed them to her chest. They were real, solid, heavy, warm as though carrying the breath of heaven itself. Her heart thudded as she whispered, "Thank you, thank you." The words were not for the crowd, nor for herself, but for something higher, something unseen, something she felt was listening. Then she did something no one expected. Instead of scooping up all the coins for herself, instead of clutching them with the hunger of a beggar who had known only cold nights and empty stomachs, she rose to her feet and looked at the faces around her. There were children with hollow cheeks, mothers with tired eyes, and old men whose hands trembled from hunger as much as age. Their need mirrored her own past suffering, and in them she saw herself, yesterday's Leora, the girl who had begged with an empty bowl. She bent again, filled her apron with coins, and walked straight to an old woman hunched at the edge of the square. The woman was known to many, widowed, frail, surviving on scraps given by neighbors. Without hesitation, Leora poured several golden coins into the woman's trembling hands. "For you," she said softly. "No more empty nights." The old woman stared, wide-eyed, before bursting into tears. "Bless you, child. May the heavens never turn from you." The crowd gasped. Some whispered louder now, unable to believe what they were seeing. But Leora did not stop. She gave to the children next, pressing coins into their little hands and smiling as their eyes lit with wonder. She moved from one poor villager to another, never hesitating, never pausing to consider what she might lose. Each gift filled her with a strange lightness, as though giving away the gold did not lessen her fortune but multiplied it in her heart. The pendant against her chest warmed with every act, glowing faintly as if approving her choices. She touched it now and then, feeling its gentle pulse, a reminder that the miracle was not hers alone. It was shared, it was meant to lift more than one life. At last, when her apron grew empty, she knelt again to gather another handful. Yet as she moved to distribute more, she noticed something extraordinary. The coins she had already given away did not diminish the pile at her feet. It remained the same, glowing softly in the dust of the square, as though it were a spring that could not run dry. She froze, realizing with awe that the miracle was greater than she imagined. The villagers, who had moments ago looked at her with envy and suspicion, began to soften. Their eyes followed her movements not with hunger but with reverence. Mothers blessed her. Men bowed their heads. Children clung to her skirts, whispering her name with delight. But not everyone's heart was softened. In the shadows of the square, a few greedy eyes glinted, merchants who thought of profit, landlords who thought of rent, and others who muttered about how one girl did not deserve such fortune. Yet even they for now were held back by the mystery of the coins. When the last of the poorest had received something, Leora stood in the center of the square, holding the last coin in her hand. She raised it to the heavens. "I thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying like a prayer. "Not only for myself but for those who had less than me. May I never forget what it means to hunger." The pendant flared against her skin, filling her with a warmth that coursed through her whole body. It was not the heat of fire but of love, a radiant energy that made her feel both small and vast at once. For the first time in her life she did not feel like a beggar or a wanderer. She felt like someone chosen, someone who carried not only her own story but the hope of others. That night, as she carried what gold remained to her small rented room at the edge of the village, she did not dream of palaces or fine gowns. She thought only of bread for tomorrow, a bed she could call her own, and perhaps one day the chance to help even more. She did not cling to greed. Her heart was full enough with gratitude. The pendant lay warm against her chest as she fell asleep, and in her dreams, a soft voice seemed to whisper, "As long as your heart stays true, the gold shall never run dry." When Leora returned home that evening, the soft glow of the pendant still warming against her chest. She carried not only her joy but also a small bundle of coins tucked carefully in her shawl. She had already shared much with the poor and the hungry along the way, pressing coins into trembling hands, watching mothers weep and fathers bow their heads with gratitude. Still, she saved enough to ensure she could finally buy proper food, fabric for clothing, and perhaps even shoes that would last through the seasons. For once, she walked into her own home with her head high. The stepmother, who had been peering through the small window since dusk, caught sight of the bundle in Leora's arms. Her eyes narrowed instantly. She had not expected Leora to return at all, and if she had, she imagined the girl dragging her feet in misery, empty-handed. But instead, here she was, radiant, glowing as if the heavens themselves had kissed her brow. "Where have you been?" the stepmother demanded the moment Leora stepped over the threshold. Her voice was sharp, trembling with both suspicion and envy. Leora paused, her gentle eyes lifting toward the woman who had long tormented her. "I was singing in the square," she said softly. "The heavens heard and a blessing fell upon me." The stepmother's lips curled. "A blessing? You speak in riddles. Show me what you carry." Without hesitation, Leora untied the bundle and revealed the gold coins. They shimmered in the dim firelight, spilling brilliance into the room. The stepmother gasped loudly, clutching her chest. The two stepsisters rushed forward, their greedy fingers reaching, but the coins slipped from their grasp as though they were made of smoke. Only when Leora touched them did they feel solid. "It is true," whispered one of the sisters, her eyes wide. "Look. They vanish for us but remain for her." "How?" the stepmother barked, her voice rising. "How did this come to you?" Leora, ever truthful, told the story as it had happened. She spoke of the square, of the song rising from her heart, and of the golden rain that had poured down, choosing her alone. As she spoke, her voice was steady, neither boastful nor fearful, only filled with quiet wonder. But the stepmother heard none of the purity in her words. Instead, she heard only the promise of riches. Her mind raced, her eyes gleamed with hunger. "So that is it," she muttered, pacing across the room. "A song, a square, and the skies pour out gold. Why should it bless you and not my daughters? No, no, it must bless us as well." "Stepmother," Leora said gently, "I did not call for it. It came by grace, not by demand." But her words fell on deaf ears. The stepmother turned to her daughters, her tone commanding. "Tomorrow you will go. You will stand in the square and sing, sing until your throats crack if you must. If the heavens gave this fool girl such wealth, they will surely give more to us. And if she has kept some trick to herself," her eyes flashed toward Leora, "then we will drag it from her." The stepsisters exchanged eager glances. One bit her lip nervously, but the other smirked with anticipation. "Imagine, sister," she whispered, "gold enough to build a palace. We will be finer than queens." "Yes," the stepmother said firmly, clapping her hands together. "And no more shall we live like commoners. This is our chance. We will not let it slip." Leora, still standing quietly by the hearth, felt the pendant glow warmer against her chest as though it pulsed with warning. She lowered her gaze, knowing her stepmother's greed would only deepen. Yet she also felt no fear. The heavens had given her a gift not meant for selfish hearts. Whatever came next, she trusted it would reveal the truth. The stepmother, however, could hardly sleep that night. She sat by the window, wringing her hands, eyes burning with restless hunger. She saw not Leora's kindness, nor the way she had shared her fortune with the poor. No, she saw only a path to her own wealth. And as the fire burned low, she whispered into the shadows, "Tomorrow the skies will rain for us. They must." The next morning, long before the sun had fully risen, the stepmother was already pacing about the courtyard. Her eyes had not rested all night, for the image of glittering gold in Leora's hands had burned into her thoughts like fire. She could not accept that the humble girl she had always despised now held more wealth than she had ever touched. Envy twisted her heart, and greed whispered in her ear. She gathered her daughters, two young women who mirrored her pride and cruelty. Both were dressed in gowns finer than the season called for, stitched with beads and dyed in bright colors that spoke more of arrogance than beauty. Their mother gave them strict instructions. You will go to the same roads, the same village, and you will not return until you have brought me twice as much gold as that wretched Leora. If she could stumble upon such fortune, then surely you, my own blood, deserve more. The stepsisters laughed at the idea of walking the dusty roads where Leora had gone, but the hunger for wealth stirred even stronger in them than in their mother. They adorned themselves with heavy jewelry, golden combs in their hair, and silk shoes upon their feet. They carried little baskets not for collecting food or offering aid, but for filling with treasure. Before leaving, they paraded in front of the household, mocking Leora as they went. "Did you hear, dear sister?" One of them sneered loudly, ensuring Leora could hear. "They say all it takes is walking like a beggar and pretending to be kind to strangers. Imagine." Even the dirt under her feet turned to gold. The other clapped her hands in mock delight. "Perhaps we should soil our dresses and roll in the dust too, maybe then the heavens will open their pockets." The two of them burst into cruel laughter, and their mother joined with a hiss of satisfaction. Leora remained silent, standing by the doorway. She did not wish them ill, but her heart ached at their scorn. She knew kindness could not be forced, nor blessings demanded. Still, she whispered a small prayer for them before they vanished down the road. As they strode into the village, the stepsisters carried themselves like royalty. They did not walk humbly or greet the morning with quiet reverence. Instead, they demanded attention wherever they went. Villagers paused in their chores, startled by the sight of the finely dressed girls, but the sisters' sharp tongues quickly erased any curiosity. When a farmer greeted them with a polite nod, they waved him off as if he were a servant. "Move aside, old man. We are in search of fortune. Do not delay us." An elderly woman, bent beneath the weight of firewood, asked timidly if they might help her carry the bundle a short distance. The elder stepsister curled her lips in disgust. "Do we look like mules to you? Carry your own sticks, hag." The younger sister chimed in with laughter. "Why would we strain ourselves for someone who has nothing to offer? We are on our way to gather gold, not to waste time with beggars." At every corner they pushed past children, sneered at laborers and ridiculed the poor. Whenever they saw someone weaker than themselves, they mocked without hesitation. They expected the heavens to notice their presence, to shower them with the same miracle Leora had received. But instead, the villagers began to whisper among themselves, shaking their heads at the arrogance of the two young women. By midday the stepsisters grew restless. Their baskets remained empty, and the road gave them nothing but dust. "Where are the coins? Where is the magic she spoke of?" One snapped, her voice sharp with impatience. "Perhaps we must demand it," the other declared. She began shouting at every passerby, "Give us gold. We know it is hidden here. Bring it out or the heavens will curse you." But their shouts only frightened people away. Mothers clutched their children tightly and hurried indoors. Merchants shut their stalls. Even the stray dogs tucked their tails and disappeared. The world seemed to turn its back on them. The sisters grew more and more furious, believing they were being cheated. "This is a trick," the elder hissed. "That wretched girl lied to us. She hoarded all the wealth for herself." "No," the younger spat, "the heavens are simply too blind to see who truly deserves it." Their faces, once painted with smugness, now twisted with rage and humiliation. They stomped along the road, each step echoing with bitterness, but the ground remained bare beneath them. By the time the sun began to fall, their gowns were soiled with dust, their shoes scuffed and torn. Sweat rolled down their brows and their jewelry felt heavier than ever. Their baskets, still empty, mocked them with every swing. And yet, not a single coin of gold had come their way. They trudged back home, exhausted and furious, their pride bruised and their hearts burning with envy. The miracle they had demanded had refused to appear, leaving only the bitterness of failure clinging to them like shadows.